We live in a country today where everything seems hotly contested, from immigration to the burgeoning presidential campaign to even patriotism, where we are dividing among ourselves, hunkering down, and for some of us, even becoming numb to one another. It seems to me that we need to remind ourselves of our connection to one another and our sense of shared humanity. And to do that, we need to engage in more acts of loving kindness. Today, your role in creating acts of loving kindness. Hi, I'm Rich Harwood. Welcome to another episode of Harwood Half Hour. I'm coming to you live from my Bethesda office in Maryland. It's great to be with you again. Shoot me a message and let me know that you can hear me and where you're coming in from today. And here's a question I'd like you to think about in the next few minutes that we're spending together. Where have you seen acts of loving kindness in your life? Where have you seen acts of loving kindness in your life? You know, recently, just last week, in fact, I was walking down the street here in Washington, D.C., and I heard someone say, "Hey, buddy, here you go." And before I knew it, I turned around and at first I saw this homeless man sitting or laying really on the sidewalk. And I saw a young man leaning over and handing the homeless individual a meal, one of those plastic meals in one of those meals in a plastic container from Starbucks, along with a banana, and saying, "Here, buddy, here you go." It was, in my mind, an act of loving kindness. Now, I know there's a debate in our country about whether or not this is the best way to help homeless people. But it seems to me in this day and age, at this time, when our presidential politics is so nasty, when our immigration debate is so contested, when even our notions of patriotism are under fire from different directions, this act of loving kindness was well, for me, was a remarkable thing to see on that morning. As I travel the country and talk to our fellow Americans about what's going on, people from all walks of life, people from all parts of the country, people from all different economic stations, people of different gender and race and heritage and ethnicity. What I hear over and over again is people lamenting the condition of our country, really our human condition in many ways. Just last week, I was in a conversation in a faith institution where people began to get into a heated debate about a political issue. And as you could see this debate taking form, you could all of a sudden see everyone back off for fear that things would get out of control if they really pursued this discussion. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a Midwestern town talking to people where there's a presidential primary that's going to take place. And folks from different political persuasions were talking about their opponents as if they were sworn enemies of them, as if they came from some other place, some other land, with maybe looking fundamentally non-human in a sense, as if they were sworn enemies. When you watch the TV news, when I watch news at night, you would think somehow or another that in some ways we have entered a new kind of civil war with different parties warring against each other, where opponents spew acrimony and division toward one another, where we see the spewing of hatred and of innuendos and of half-truths and of outright lies about one another. And this is going on and on. And my fear as all this is happening, and I suspect you might hold some of these fears as well, is that our rhetoric has become overheated, that our sense of posturing has become, in a sense, overblown, and that we are on a dangerous path where our emotions and our feelings and our posturing and our rhetoric is putting us on this dangerous path where we will not be able to take collective action on those things that require us to come together and act, that require us to create a more inclusive, hopeful society that require us to bring out the best in us and the best of us. Over and over again, I hear people in our country say we can do better, that we can be better. And yet we're on this path where that's becoming increasingly difficult to make happen. We risk at times seeing each other as wearing jerseys from opposing teams where we simply can't come together, even though we belong to the same communities and the same country. We are cartooning one another's views at a time when we need a healthier dose of reality in our lives. And I fear that we are dehumanizing one another at a time when we are becoming increasingly numb to one another. And so we are failing to see and hear each other. It seems to me that we are at times failing or have forgotten the intrinsic value of one another, that we are deadening our senses to one another on this dangerous path that we're on, and that the real victim of this is something so basic, so fundamental in our lives, and that is human dignity. And without a sense of human dignity, we lose our sense that we matter to one another, that what matters to you matters to me, that we see and hear one another, that we can accomplish things together, that we can believe in one another. And at that point, it makes it difficult to create the kinds of communities and the kinds of society that I know, not just that I believe, but that I know we all aspire to. And so I've painted kind of a bleak picture. What can you do? What can you do? And so I have 3 questions for you today to help you engage in acts of loving kindness, 3 questions. And here's the first one. And remember, I think these acts of loving kindness are what enable us to break through, in a sense, and to see each other again, to hear each other again, to value each other. And so the first question is this: what does it mean for you to awaken your senses? What does it mean for you to awaken your senses? I know, and you know, that we need larger change in our society, that we need on so many issues systemic change in our society, whether it's about race and equity, or about education, or about poverty, or about healthcare. There are so many ways in which we need transformational change in our society. And that's something I often argue for, and it's something I believe deeply in. But here's the thing. Increasingly, I've come to believe that we also need to break through and wake ourselves up from this numbness that we feel, this anger that we feel, this hunkering down that's taken place, this division that's occurring, as we take part in these hotly debated debates that are polarizing, that dehumanize us, that push us into corners, that make us sworn enemies. And so when I think about this, I think about when you see, for instance, a homeless person sitting on the ground like this young guy did in Washington where I was the other day. Do you see them? When you hear these hotly political debates going on, do you see and hear your political opponents, those you believe are on the other side of the debate? As I said, we can become numb to these things around us. We can decide to look the other way. We can become desensitized to them. And it seems to me that in order for us to engage in acts of loving kindness, you need to be present. We need to be awake. We need to be alive. In other words, we need to awaken our senses. And so here's what I want you to think about. In order to awaken your senses, I want you to identify 2 or 3 things in your life that help awaken your senses. And I want you to write them down. For me, personally, the things that awaken my senses that I do all the time, I say morning prayers every morning, and those help me to awaken my senses. I awaken my senses when I go for a run most mornings before I come to work. I awaken my senses by engaging in deep conversations about the purpose of my life and where I gain meaning. Now, these are the things that awaken my senses: praying in the morning, running, engaging in deep conversations. What are the 2 or 3 things for you that awaken your senses? I think you need to know them. I think you need to write them down. Most importantly, after you write them down, you need to do them on a regular basis, because otherwise, in our society, given what's going on, given what we see on the television news, given what we hear presidential candidates talking about, given what we see all around us happening, it's too easy to turn away, hunker down, and to become numb. And we need to reawaken our senses if we're going to engage in acts of loving kindness. So the first question is, what does it mean for you, or what does it take for you to awaken your senses? Here's the second question. What does it mean for you to see and hear others in these times? What does it mean, or what does it take for you to see and hear others in these times? Again, the homeless man on the ground. What does it take for you to see and hear them? The political opponent. What does it take for you to see and hear your political opponent? When you're sitting at dinner and you're in a heated argument with a friend, a spouse, a partner, someone else, a colleague at work, and all of a sudden you shut down, which we all do, particularly in these times, what does it take for you to see and hear others? If we're going to engage in acts of loving kindness, then we've got to see and hear one another. If we're going to engage in acts of loving kindness, then we've got to afford one another dignity. If we're going to engage in acts of loving kindness, then you need to believe in the intrinsic value of every individual, And here's the thing. In order for you to see and hear other people, here's what I need you to do. I need you to look in the mirror. I don't need you to look at others initially. I need you to look at yourself. I need for you to look in the eyes of yourself when you're looking in the mirror and think about the questions. Am I willing to see and hear others? Do I really believe in the dignity, the human dignity of all individuals, not just some? Do I really believe in the intrinsic value of all people? And it seems odd that I'm asking you to see and hear other people, but I'm asking you to first look in the mirror at yourself, because in order to see and hear other people, we've got to get real with ourselves. We've got to get right with ourselves. We've got to know what we're willing to do ourselves. You have to make the commitment to yourself that this is of value, that it's important, that it's the right thing to do. Another way to think about this is we've got to get right with ourselves. And so if the first question I'm asking you to think about is, what does it take for you to awaken your senses? And I want you to identify 2 or 3 things that help you do that on a daily basis. The next thing I'm asking, the second question, is, what does it mean for you to see and hear one another in these times? And for that, I'm actually asking you to look in the mirror at yourself and get right with yourself. And the third question is, then once you've done those first 2 things, how can you be an agent for acts of loving kindness? The young guy I saw in Washington, D.C., who leaned over and said, "Hey, buddy, this is for you," who gave that homeless man that meal from Starbucks and the banana, he was an agent for acts of loving kindness. There are all sorts of things that we can do. There are all sorts of things that you can do. And believe me, they don't have to be difficult. They certainly don't have to be complex. They often just take a moment. They're not time-consuming at all. They just require us to do it. When someone comes on public transit, a train, a plane, a bus that you're riding, do you get up and offer them your seat? That's an act of loving kindness. When you see someone approaching a door, do you hold open the door for them? That, to me, can be an act of loving kindness. When you see a stranger, do you say hello? That is definitely an act of loving kindness. Do you compliment a colleague, a coworker, a family member, a stranger, a healthcare worker? That's an act of loving kindness. Do you visit the sick? Do you visit the lonely, the person who's lonely? When you see an elderly person on your street who you know is alone, do you go up to them and simply say hello and smile? These are all acts of loving kindness. They break through the deadening part of what's happening around us. They release us from being numb. They help us to afford other people a sense of dignity. They demonstrate that we believe in the intrinsic value of each and every person. And here's the only thing that you need to do to engage in these acts of loving kindness. You need to step forward. You simply need to step forward and engage in the act, to be an agent for acts of loving kindness. So, yes, I believe in larger change. Yes, I'm committed to larger change. Yes, I've made my life's work about larger change, and I will never pull back from that, nor will I apologize for it. But it seems to me right now, amid our need for larger change, we've got to find a way to awaken our senses. You need to find a way to awaken your senses. We need to be alive. We need to be present. We need to be in the world with others. We need to engage in acts of loving kindness. And for this, I'm just asking you to think about 3 questions. What does it take for you to awaken your senses? What does it mean for you to see and hear other people? And how can you be an agent for acts of loving kindness? So here's my hope for you today. I always end with a hope for you, so here's my hope for you today. Make the effort to do acts of loving kindness each and every day, and shine a light in places where you see darkness. And while your light may be small and that darkness may seem vast, if enough of us do it, or if simply you just do it, someone will see it, they'll be touched by your act of loving kindness, and they'll gain a greater sense of hope and possibility about what can still come and what can still be created and what we can do together and how we can believe in one another. And so this marks another episode of Harwood Half Hour. I'm thrilled that you decided to join me today. Thanks for coming. Remember that we're celebrating at the Harwood Institute our 30th anniversary this year. It's hard to believe, but it's happening. Yes, we are celebrating it. Yes, we're happy about it. But most of all, we've recommitted ourselves to doubling down on finding ways to support your good efforts in communities, in the communities in which you live, the communities in which you work, to make sure that we together can create a more inclusive, hopeful society. Our work is rooted in a philosophy of civic faith and the practice of turning outward. It has now spread to all 50 states in the US and been pulled into about 40 countries. You can learn more about our work at our website, theharwoodinstitute.org. You can join me next Tuesday at 4 p.m., or not next Tuesday, in 2 weeks from today, on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of Harwood Half Hour. Until then, be well. Thanks.